After the death of his mother and sister in front of his eyes, Einar must learn how to cope with the difficulties and tribulations of life. As his life switches from that of a farmer to a captive and finally to a pathetic slave, he must adapt to the changing circumstances if he hopes to survive in a cruel world where only the rich are given the respect and the poor are stepped upon. Welcome back to Anime Soreio. In this episode, we're going to recap the Vinland Saga Season 2. Do subscribe to Anime Soreio and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with our latest uploads. And now, back to the show. Our protagonist, a ponytailed man named Einar, is seen hacking at a tree with his axe. Everyone mocks his efforts, but Einar merely responds to their jests by telling that he is training for war. He is told that he'd be hopeless in war, despite his heavy frame, which greatly aggravates him. It is revealed that his father had died while trying to protect his family, and Einar now felt it was his responsibility to defend the village against any threat that posed itself. After a slight time lapse, Einar is shown with his mother and sister as they survey their village being attacked by ferocious warriors. The blazing flames are illuminated in their eyes as they watch on from the refuge of a bush. The family attempt to flee through the adjoining forest, but Einar's mother is hit with a stray arrow and she collapses. With her final words, she advises them to escape before the warriors find them, and then, in front of Einar and his sister Lotta, she passes away. By then, the savages manage to track them down and attempt to kidnap Lotta, but when she resists, her stomach is slashed, and then they drag Einar away, leaving his sister's body to rot in the forest. Another time-lapse takes place, with Einar now seated in a tent, but his malnutritioned face is barely recognizable, with the cheekbones protruding out and his eyes dark with hopelessness. Disease and death is rife among the residents of the tent, as before Einar's eyes, an ailing woman is carried away because her sickness is deemed incurable. Her body is flung off the ship, on which the tent is set up, much to the horror of the traumatized villager. The captors announce that no one should fall sick until they find a buyer for them, and then hand out supplies that were already in short stock. The ship eventually reaches a port where the prisoners are given food and then made to freshen themselves up. Einar manages to escape while the rest of the captives are being displayed to potential buyers, but does not get far before he is caught and brutally lashed and beaten. Now even more disheartened, Einar is forced to silently endure humiliation as buyers inspect him, while loudly uttering mocking remarks. A middle-aged man eventually agrees to purchase him as a farmhand, and this is where he is introduced to Thorfinn, a woodcutter in the man's field. Einar's master, whose name is revealed to be Ketil, discusses the job being handed to the villager. Working together with Thorfinn, Einar was to cut down the trees of a forest owned by Ketil and in its place plant a wheat farm. Much to his surprise, Ketil further announces that he would purchase the resulting harvest from the two, and when its value exceeded the price paid for the slaves, he would grant them freedom. Once his master is gone, Einar attempts to strike up a conversation with Thorfinn, but to no avail. The woodcutter was silent and merely revealed that he hailed from Iceland in reply to Einar's constant questioning. The almost impossible task of clearing the forest soon became apparent to the villager as he explored the woods, and coupled with the fact that he barely knew how to use an axe, the work seemed extremely laborious. Moreover, Einar was still not used to being a slave and almost got into a tussle with the retainers, who overlooked matters at the farm until Thorfinn intervened to calm the situation. After a long day of strenuous work, Einar is close to being sick, mainly because the measly lunch offered had not been enough to fulfill him. In a fit of rage, he attempts to report the problems he faced to Ketil, but is left speechless when he catches a glimpse of the attractive young lady that was accompanying him. Eventually, Einar gets into the routine of the job and is amazed to see that Ketil also lent a hand during the harvesting process. Despite his patience with the workers, Ketil shows great annoyance with his son Olmar's careless attitude and constantly reprimands him until Olmar gallops away in a huff. Come nightfall, Olmar raced around on his horse, his mind speeding with negative thoughts about his father, who expected him to continue the farming business, but Olmar's wishes were to become a warrior. Meanwhile, Einar was unable to sleep, and so told Thorfinn about the murders of his mother and sister, but the slave remained silent. He had his fair share of traumatic memories, such as the burning down of his village, but he preferred to not share them with anyone. That same night, Olmar is taken to a bar by two guards where, under the influence of alcohol, he challenges them to a sparring match. He is easily outsmarted, which adds to his frustration, and he throws a fit. To calm him down, the retainers proceed to misguide him, saying that once he manages to murder a human being, his masculinity would enhance, and they even suggested that he should kill a slave. The next morning, Thorfinn awakens screaming from a nightmare that he can barely remember, and remains uneasy for some time. Einar meets with the attractive girl he had seen with Ketil on his first day, and finds out her name is Arnheid, and that she was Ketil's personal attendant. Right as they were getting to know each other, the two guards who were with Olmar appear and take Thorfinn and Einar along with them to Olmar, who was waiting with the sword. Olmar was hesitant in performing the deed, and while he made up his mind, Einar refused to give up easily and wrestled him to the ground. Seeing this, Thorfinn offered himself to be killed, much to the amazement of one of the guards, who then began to slash him across his body with his sword. Thorfinn showed no reaction to the brutality, silently taking the pain, and just when it seemed that the injuries might become fatal, the guard's boss intervened and put an end to the cruelty. The boss, whose name was Snake, apologizes on behalf of the guards and forces them to tend to Thorfinn's wounds. He then attempts to attack the slave, whose automatic reaction is to defend himself. Snake points this out to Thorfinn, saying that his body was not ready to die yet. The two slaves are returned back to the farm, where Ketil's caretaker applies healing lotion to Thorfinn's cuts and advises them to come to him for support if such an incident took place again. He also reveals that it was Arnheid who told him that the two had been taken away, much to Einar's delight. Despite his injuries, Thorfinn refuses to take a day off and returns to the woods along with Einar to continue chopping trees. It is here that he opens up about his dark past, disclosing that he had been a warrior since a young age and had killed a number of enemy soldiers as part of his duty. This led to Einar's silence as he contemplated on what to say. The following night, Einar could no longer hold in his rage as he thought about the soldiers that killed his family, and he attempts to choke Thorfinn in his sleep. He soon regains control and lets go of Thorfinn's throat, and right after, the slave wakes up screaming from another one of his horrifying nightmares. When he calms down, Thorfinn talks about how his whole life had always been full of suffering and that there was no point in staying alive for him, which becomes too much for Einar to bear, who then urges him to appreciate the life he has. This was just the wake-up call that Thorfinn needed as he begins to realize how much of his life he has wasted. And that brings us to the end of today's recap. What a cruel and dark story. I really hope that there will be some light at the end of the tunnel for these characters. But what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments. And as for everything else, like, share, and subscribe to Anime Soreio for more recaps like this, analysis and comparison videos of your beloved characters, and much more. With that said, we'll see you in the next one. Peace!